All right. Thanks for joining, Kane. Really appreciate you, man.
No, it's all good. It's good to be here.
Yeah. So like, just get it out of the way. Like, big fanboy of yours, Chiefs rugby and stuff. Like, I have like an uncharacteristically like large knowledge of like New Zealand rugby. Just growing up and like falling in love with the game late, as it were. Here in the States, you don't get it till you're like 16, 17. But sort of followed you along, and then obviously like working at the Iron Neck. Came across your name one day, and I was like, oh,
Cool.
like, yeah, like I recognize that name, And they go, oh, do you? And my bosses, because I'm working remote these days, from San Diego, and they're like, oh, you know this guy? And I was like, well, I don't know him, but I know who he is.
Yeah,
So I'm
awesome.
gonna get my lights set up here.
No, don't worry about it. It's all good.
House is a million years old. Stay there for me, please. Anyways, yeah, man, it was great to like sort of come across that, and like sort of see that, and then obviously like hopefully like, I saw some things on social media. You're trying to get back into playing rugby, and yeah, that's been really cool. That's just like a cool sort of like happenstance, because working for the Iron Neck, you meet lots of different people, chiropractors,
Yeah,
team physios, strength coaches, athletes, of all different sort of sports and denominations. And Nick Gill, All Blacks guy, was one of the first ones. Saw what we had, really liked it, wanted it, and like 2015, he beat teams in the NFL, to the punch, and everything that's Iron Neck is sort of made in America, and
yeah,
they're in Texas, and they just sort of sort of passed over a bit. So being in the All Blacks camp, I think a lot of strength coaches. Ed Cosner is a guy who I chatted with a bunch, and Ben Franks knows pretty well from this Crusaders setup,
yeah,
and they all just sort of got on board with that, and that helped us out. I imagine sort of cracking into other things. So
yeah. Cool.
yeah,
Yeah,
very.
because I first heard about it on the Joe Rogan show, I think, or maybe my trainer did and heard about how big people's necks got off it. You see, why don't you
Oh
have a look
man,
into
like
it?
that guy Joe Rogan is such a hero. Like I asked some questions about it because I have a huge region of the country, of this great big
Yeah,
country. So from Colorado all the way out to Hawaii, like including Alaska.
yeah,
So Joe is like living in Vegas and doing his thing in the podcast and stuff. I'm like, oh, well, obviously I'm going to get to meet Joe, and we'll hang out and do like, drugs and stuff, and just have a great time.
yeah,
Because he's so like, because he's obviously an investor and stuff, but he's not, this is something that he uses. And he's just one of those guys, just a champion that says like, this is a great product. People need these products, and he just asks people about it, and but he's talked about it, numerous times, and it's a huge benefit to us. And he's
yeah.
got no stake in the company. He's just someone who really enjoys it. So yeah, that's a very familiar story. Like anyone I meet, I've got an Iron Neck shirt on, walking around San Diego, and they go, "Oh, from Joe Rogan." Yeah, yeah,
That's cool.
yeah. So just like really quickly for any of the nerds who don't know who you are you from Tasman? Like originally, like you were always a Marco, or?
No, I played for Bay of Plenty in the Mitre 10 Cup earlier. I actually worked for Bay of Plenty for about 5 years, coaching rugby in schools and around clubs around the community and stuff. And then we weren't doing very well at the time, and we had sort of a long period of time where we weren't doing well. And I was quite interested in coaching and sort of a career after rugby and coaching. And sort of thought that if I stuck around Bay of Plenty, as sort of bad as it sounds, I didn't think I'd learn as much as I needed to, because the sort of the current results sort of, I thought to myself, if I did the same thing, I'd get the same results with my team. So I wanted to learn something a bit different, something that led me more towards success. And Tasman were doing very well at the time, and they still continue to do well. They won the competition last year. So I decided to move down here, and it sort of worked out well. I've had heaps of opportunities out on the back of it. Fell in love with Nelson, and decided to stay here. It's been good.
Yeah, that's a beautiful place. So my wife and I traveled around New Zealand for like 6 weeks, and we did quite a bit of travel. So we met, the first place we went to. We were sort of supposed to go to Christchurch for the 2011 World Cup.
Oh yes,
So you can buy packages, right? Like you get like a stadium package, or you can follow your team. And like, well, like the club I was playing for at the time was sort of, there were Kiwi guys sort of formed the club a long time ago, and they were from Christchurch. So I was like, well, we should probably go there, right? Like just sort of have a bit of a network when we get down there. The earthquakes, obviously, that didn't happen. They sort of shook all that stuff up, and so we made it happen. They sort of scattered our tickets from Dunedin at the south all the way to North Harbour and in between. And just looking at it, like it's not a huge place, and like like we've never been there. How are we going to make this happen? So, all these weeks later, we have this awesome trip, and we start in North Harbour and we work our way down. But the place we stayed the most time in was a place called Whakatane.
Oh yeah.
And we stayed with some people there. They're called the Sinkinsons, and they're like local rugby hero.
Yeah, no, I know them. I grew up in Whakatane, so I know the Sinkinsons.
Oh, nice. Yeah. So Craig and Lauren, like, they put me and my wife up at the time because, my buddy introduced me via an email. He did some student teaching down there. A guy named Casey Rock, who plays for the Glendale Raptors here in the States. And, he sent them an email, and like pretty classic Kiwi stuff from what I understand now is like, hey, I haven't been around for a few years, but I know these people, they're all right. And I vouch for them. So we got down there, and they had to pick us up in Tauranga because the bus from Auckland didn't go all the way to Whakatane. So Lauren drove out, picked us up, had a beer at the pub. And then, we went there and we stayed there for a few weeks, and it's just unreal hospitality. They took such good care of us, and then at the end of it, in the middle of it, we watched the All Blacks play Japan. We watched Samoa play Namibia and Rotorua, and traveling around. And at the end of it, Craig's like, hey, my son didn't pass his driving test. We've got this car that's sitting out back. Like, you should take it to your trip to Wellington, leave it with my brother-in-law, and take your ferry down to Picton and Nelson. So we did that, had an epic 3 weeks in the North Island, just sort of rolling around, dropped that car off, sprinted onto the ferry, like as the gate was closing, and then spent some time in Nelson, where I played rugby with a guy named Tavita Kolomatangi, who was there, and, the Thornleys, who ran that club for a long time, Neri and her husband. I think her son is still involved, like with the management of the club. They I think in the mid 90s came through America and sort of coached the club I was at in San Francisco. And that was, again, that was the only contact I had, was a guy who coached my club 16 years ago, hit them up, and they said, yep, come on down. So we stayed a few days in Nelson, and what a beautiful place, so great, like awesome times.
It's weird. All these people you've been listing, I know all of them pretty much. In terms of the Sinkinsons, I know the family well. One of them played for, only one side of the family well. And he had a nickname, which I've forgotten, but I knew the kids quite well too from all the coaching in Whakatane. I grew up in Whakatane, went to school there. And then now am involved in the club that the Thornellies, so I'm from Marist here in Nelson, which is the club they're all involved with. Tavita Kolomatangi, he wasn't involved in there though, I don't think. Was Tavita a Marist man, or what club did you play for?
I think he was mostly he's the Tasman guy. So he's capped by Tonga.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And was sort of seeking that promotion, I think, at the time. Like when I met him and another guy who just unreal rugby players showed up in San Francisco, and just we just want 6 months in the States, and like from San Francisco, they went to New York, and, they went all these different places. Yeah. And so Tavita's there now. I think he's
running at 45.
Yeah, he's doing that for sure when he's in town. The rest of the time, he's still playing out his contract in Japan, I think. His wife, Belinda, and now they have 2 little kids there. Yeah, but I would have walked past him, on the street and never knew who he was at the time in 2011.
Yeah.
If he was there, but he was there we were there for just a few days, and made a huge impression on us. We really like it. It's such a beautiful place. Yeah, and we drove down the sort of the Tasman side of the island and went through all the places on the way to the Milford Sound, and we really got to get back there. Yeah, it was just such a very cool. It looked really like the place we went to university, actually, here in Northern California, at the very tippy top of California.
Yep. Yeah, it's a small place, Nelson, and because I grew up in Whakatane, it's a small place there as well, obviously. So I never really clicked with the big places. When I was with the Chiefs, I didn't click as well with Hamilton. And sort of missed Nelson quite a lot when I was there. Yeah, so small places, sort of good rugby communities, good people. That's sort of how I stuck around Nelson, and that's why I'm still here.
That's great. So you went from the BOP down all the way down to the Highlanders for your first contract then? Like that was your
Yeah,
first rugby.
yep, that's sort of how it worked. It was strange because I was at a rugby, because I was working for Bay of Plenty, the rugby development officer job. My office was right next to the head coach for the Mighty 10 Cup team. So the Bay of Plenty team, the head coach sat next door. One day he sort of came in and said, "Hey, the All Blacks are in town," which everyone knew anyway. But doing the camps, and they don't have any. A couple of front rowers. Tony Woodcock is injured. Maybe someone else. He said, "Could you go and fill in and help out?" And that's not unusual. Wherever the All Blacks are, they might call people in to help out with training. The Chiefs did it too in South Africa, where we brought in some local club lads. So that's not unusual to bring people from the region in. I sort of got brought in. I wasn't a Mighty 10 Cup player. I was just the development officer for the union. Got brought in and scrum quite well. I'd been working quite hard on my scrummaging and strength and stuff like that, and had been watching a ton of Brad Thorne's videos and Owen Frank's and all of them. So sort of I thought I was doing the right stuff, and sort of had been watching Mike Cron's videos since I was a kid as well. CD-ROMs, I think they were at the time.
That's right. For a few minutes before you can watch.
Yeah. So I was quite passionate about scrummaging and strength for quite a while. So that sort of led me to be able to do well at the scrum side of things. And from that couple of times that I got called into the All Blacks camp as a fill-in, a local lad, which they do often. The word Owen Franks and Ben Franks knew Brad Thorne quite well. They knew they were looking for a loose head prop down at the Highlanders. They sort of mentioned my name and said, "Hey, there's this guy in Bay of Plenty you guys might be interested in." And through that sort of camp, I got both a Mighty 10 Cup contract and Highlanders contract out of that camp. Yeah, so it all worked out really well. Within 3 months, I went from playing club rugby to playing Super Rugby pretty much. And I travelled to Toronto and Philadelphia in between for the Māori All Blacks, played against America and Canada. All from that camp. Of course, there's a ton of work that led to being able to sort of perform at the camp, but all from that camp, all of these opportunities came about.
Yeah. Just shouldn't skateboard down to the park one day. Yeah, that's a. No worries, guys. I'm gonna be an All Black next year.
Yeah, sweet.
Yeah, that's so like unique. I think maybe to rugby in sport. Like where someone can be the number one team in the world, 510 weeks in a row. And they're just like, hey, we really want to involve people in the community. We want, like, this is your team. And the more people I talk to, I talked to Ben Franks for a little while, and I talked to some other people, and it seems just such a common thread, like they just so humble, and people are just welcome. It's an inclusive environment, and you had the goods, like you showed them what they had, and you impressed. The guy who's the head coach of the Queensland Reds right now has played 2 different codes, has won championships and like every competition he's gone to, and Brad Thorne, and then, the Franks brothers, obviously, like traveling around the globe and destroying scrums and winning World Cups and stuff. So yeah, that's what a great story. Like, it's just so cool to hear, especially like in the States now where even rugby can be like unattainable for some people. So
yeah.
Very, very cool to hear that. So only a couple of years at the Highlanders and then off to the Chiefs after your All Blacks, or your Maori All Blacks, sorry.
Yeah, I had 2 years at the Highlanders. First year, played quite a bit of games. Second year, not so much. Had a couple of issues with injuries in my knees and stuff like that. Probably had a bit of a bad attitude as well. Brad Thorne, who was quite a big mentor to me in the first year, left. And in the second year, probably, I might have went a little bit astray. So coupled with an injury and sort of a bit of a bad attitude, I didn't get offered a contract for the year after. So I found myself without a contract for 6 months, so I took that sort of, it ended up being longer because I was injured anyway. It took about 8 months to really work on, some attitude stuff and my body, and came to Tasman at that time, which was a big change for me. My trainer, Glenn Stewart, the one who told me about the iron neck, quite a good trainer, very good trainer, world class. he helped fix my knees up and helped me with, quite a few other things. Brad Thorne was always in the background helping me out, and watched tons of self-help videos on YouTube, and
Yeah.
how to have a better attitude. And then and then sort of I got an opportunity with the Chiefs, and then stayed there for a little while. It was quite interesting too, because I've been a rugby fan my whole life. I sort of support all teams. I have loved Wales and Ireland and South Africa growing up, as well as the All Blacks. I loved heaps of different rugby teams, heaps of different Super Rugby teams. You start playing for one, and all of a sudden it becomes quite tribal. So I started playing for the Highlanders. As a result, I didn't like the Hurricanes and the Crusaders and the Chiefs and the Blues, and then all of a sudden I'm faced with having to play for the Chiefs again, and then you think to yourself, well, like once a Highlander, always a Highlander. They always talk that sort of stuff, So and then all of a sudden I'm once a Chief, always a Chief. So now I'm sort of a two-team sort of guy, and you sort of get tribal and maybe don't like the other teams. But now I've sort of come out of the experience, and if I was to play again, I could see myself wanting to play for all sort of Super Rugby teams and really experience all there is to learn about how people do things differently. And again, for the end goal of going back into coaching, so that I can hopefully learn as much and take as much away from all those environments, and then turn it into, melt them together and turn it into something else, something that's my own, I guess.
Yeah, I guess if you were Sonny Bill Williams, right, you would play for all the Super Rugby teams. No sweat. Yeah, just like that guy, just like every year, like, I'm gonna check these guys out. Like no big deal.
Yeah, I like Sonny. He's sort of a guy I've talked to a little bit too, not a lot, but a little bit, and he's quite obsessed with learning different things too. And it can be like that. If you stay in one team, you're only going to learn a certain way of thinking. And for provincial rugby, I think it's a bit more tribal than Super Rugby. So if you play for a province, you really should only play for that province.
Yeah.
People are very, because that's where home is essentially. Whereas the Super Rugby franchises only in five, you can only sort of play for them in 5 places in New Zealand: Dunedin, Christchurch, Wellington, Hamilton, and Auckland. So if you're not from those areas, and many players are outside of those areas, you don't have the same affinity, because it's not home. If you're from Invercargill, Southland's your home. If you're from Nelson, Tasman's your home. So the franchise thing, people don't mind moving around franchises as much. I feel, in terms of the feeling of it, and I just think there's so much to learn. If you're not getting a shot in one franchise and you get an opportunity to go to another franchise, 1, you'll learn something different. 2, you might get a shot. So I don't think it's as tribal at Super Rugby, and I like that too, because I could easily, in my mind, play for any of them now, and hopefully learn a ton of something that I haven't learned before. That was the case with the Highlanders and the Chiefs. Different ways of thinking, different things to learn, different ways to play the game.
Yeah, I think that's probably like a coaching mindset. Just being a student of the game, you want to benefit, from the experiences, and there's no better experience, right, than to go and get stuck into into a whole new group of coaches and teams and players. And for me, like new places, it's great, to get out and sort of see new places and find new little places to eat and find new places to sort of hang out and chill with your friends and have those experiences. So yeah, it's fantastic. I think there's one thing, at least in America, it's a bit different. Like this professional rugby has started, 3 or 4 different times and sort of failed 3 or 4 times. The MLR now is a lot different. I think the league has a bit of legs, and there's, until this, like the Planet sort of closing up shop for the year, had been going pretty well, and doing things better, getting talent in from other countries, but trying to build a domestic game and an interest, like a real interest, and so that you can sort of have the infrastructure. But it's always sort of been that like club rugby. Like when I played club rugby in San Francisco, there was 9 out of 15 guys who were international players, had international caps for Tonga, Samoa, USA, and we were playing teams from down the street. And like it was just going to be, some of the games were going to be rough score-wise, but that was sort of it. So now we've got this new level, but you have the same attitude where it's like, well, you're going to play the best rugby at this club or that club.
Yeah,
the clubs are hundreds of miles away. Like San Diego to San Francisco is almost 600 miles. Then you've got to go, to Seattle. You've got to go to Denver. You've got to go to New York, which is 3,000 miles. So it was always sort of this, like, I'm going to die for this club, and I'm going to win a Division II championship,
Yeah.
which I think ultimately holds us back, right? Like, we should be promoting players that seek out the opportunities as you have, like players that want to play at a higher level, learn more, do more things. And then eventually, like you said, home is home. Like, home is always going to be, that place, for you, and you can always support that club and that team. But the professionalism of it and like the development, I think you don't get it without travel, like without dropping into the deep end, and like, oh, you're going to be an All Black next year. Like, you're going to go to this one camp one day, and then you're going to follow, you're going to sort of chase that feeling and that momentum and get to a place where, you're a professional rugby player, and eventually you'd be a professional coach, I imagine, the way things are going.
I'd like to I'd like to chase something like that, and the tribal thing can also, because you're right, it can get in the way of maybe moving to a place you need to learn something different and to get an opportunity. But also what it does is, I think the tribal thing, after playing against South Africa, I was talking to one of the players, and I won't name him, but he was talking about how they don't share ideas sometimes in the team. He was quite new to the team, but he was saying, the stuff that he does in his province that he thinks would be helpful for the Springboks, nobody wants to hear about it. They don't like to share ideas either. If you're from the Bulls, you don't share with the Lions. If you're from the Lions, you don't share with the Stormers or the Western Province boys.
Yeah.
And I don't know how true that is. Again, he was new, but that wasn't the case with wasn't the case in the All Blacks. Once you're in the All Blacks, you're wanting the All Blacks to do well, and it's quite open book. If you come in from the Crusaders, you'll share ideas and say, this is what I think we can do well for the team. If you're from the Chiefs, same thing. And then you've got coaches sharing with each other too quite a lot as well. So, you'd hate for that tribal stuff to get in the way of progressing and learning. And you'd hate for it especially to get in the way of your national team doing well. So, something.
Maybe things have changed in SA, right? Because things seem to have picked up a bit, but for a little while, they were. I mean, I think you were part of a team that beat them 57-0. So I think if you're as rugby proud of a nation as they are, and I chatted with a South African buddy of mine who played for Natal, went to the Sharks Academy and stuff, and eventually sort of moved on. And it's an unreal experience from what I'm told. Like, there's so many people in South Africa in these big cities and things. So like the Lions tour next year, it's going to be just out of hand, just how many rugby crazy people there are there. So it can, he said it was taxing for him, from a young age, going through that and sort of, the crash course and like, hey, we don't talk to those people and we're going to beat these guys, the schoolboy stuff even, like I've seen videos of schoolboy days and like big matches and things. And they just, it seems like it's almost another world on a game day there.
Yeah. It's like a religion there for them. Like it sometimes is for us.
For sure.
It's crazy. I sort of love seeing the passion and loved going to South Africa and still do. And it's a place I'd love to work one day. So I always sort of thought I'd play for Western Province. I knew quite a few people growing up in Whakatane. Western Province, it's Cape Town family, and Western Province was their club. So I guess from a young age, I've always wanted to play for all these different teams and clubs and travel to these different rugby nations. Because I think first and foremost, I fell in love with the sport of rugby and scrums, rather than just falling in love with a team. If you're just an All Black supporter, maybe your eyes are closed to the beautiful side of what Wales is doing, or the Springboks, and really getting attached to that. So I think when you fall in love with rugby first, you can see the beauty, wherever it is, instead of being a one-eyed sort of supporter and only supporting your team. That's what I think I probably happened with me. I fell in love with rugby first before I fell in love with teams.
Yeah, it's a fantastic way, like, to say it, and I try to talk to people about it, as if you were a painter, like, you would only look at your stuff. You'd only look at painters that painted like you. Like, how would we ever have a guy like Picasso who is drawing, some outrageous things, like, just, like, he would never you would never synthesize, you know, anything new. You know, you just sort of be stuck in that one thing, and it takes that one person to sort of look outside the box and yeah, to appreciate the game in all of its forms, right? Like
Yep.
Wales is a very rugby like centric place, like just an like loves rugby, you know, and like there it's such a like New Zealand, like Ireland, you know, South Africa too, you know, like it's a smaller place full of just people that are super passionate about it, that want it, you know, that want their team to succeed, and that sort of breeds that competition from within, I think, which is, you know, crucial to anything, you know, like you have to have a competition to find out, you know, where you fall down and where you don't, and what you're good at and what you're not. And obviously New Zealand's got that honed in pretty well, like with rugby, you know, like there's a lot of steel sharpening steel in that country for sure.
Yeah.
And then just, you know, then putting it all under pressure against the best in the world. So yeah, I think it's fantastic, you know, and I think that it's probably the best thing about the sport is that wherever you go, it's different, you know, there's different intents and there's different you know, systems and things, but ultimately the game comes down to catch, pass, tackle, support, right? So you can go to a different country and like immediately get stuck into a group of people you've never met because like, oh, that guy, he did really well in the scrums today, like he did this, he did that, you know, like, yeah, we're gonna keep this guy around, and like we'll buy him a beer and you know, shirt, you know, and he'll be around next week, and like now we've got a new loose head prop, like yeah, sweet. Very
That's
cool.
what I love. Yeah, that's what I love about the rugby community. So everywhere you've gone, the rugby community, the rugby people seem to be quite similar, don't they? So
it's the same. It's the same.
Yeah. So you just travel the world and you just stay with rugby people, and it's the same conversations, although different teams and different colours. But they're still great people, and still sort of it's such a huge community, which I love being a part of.
Yeah, the refs always shit, right? And like your team would be amazing if everyone was out. Like if everyone, like if this guy wasn't hurt and this guy was eligible, like we'd have beat these guys and those guys, and the ref did us wrong, and like it's all the same story, man. So that's that is awesome, and it's just so nice to like to have that affirmed, you know, like from someone as well traveled as yourself. Yeah. So you know, I didn't talk to Ben too much about being an All Black just because. You know, he's sort of moving on, like he's sort of done with rugby playing wise and sort of moving on to Scarlets to coach. You know, he mentioned that moving back to New Zealand was sort of like the end goal. Like he, you know, but he's sort of like, I hope that it happens. And I was like, well, I think it'll happen, Ben. Like you're Ben Franks, like you'll probably be able to land a job in New Zealand at some point, I imagine. But he seemed sort of like it would be competitive for him, you know, like it would be tough for him to sort of crack into coaching, and that he was happy to take this job in Wales. So you've got aims at becoming a player again, or still?
I still get concussion symptoms. It's something that I think are concussion symptoms. I took quite a few knocks in 2017, and for 3 years now, I've been thinking about it quite a lot. I feel like it's almost like one, I'm uncomfortable a lot of the time. And two, I'm not as resilient to noise, to light, to stresses, to stuff like that. And like I said, most of the time for the last 3 years, most days have just been uncomfortable days, getting to the point now where they're more comfortable or more used to them. But I'm not as resilient. However, I do know it could simply be just bad anxiety that I've never suffered in my life before, maybe even brought on by concussions. And sometimes I don't think they are, because anxious thoughts don't trigger symptoms. Normally it's stimulation. I play PlayStation, which I didn't used to do. All of a sudden I've got bad symptoms. I go to a loud movie, got bad symptoms. I coach too much rugby, or I train too much in the gym. All of a sudden I've got symptoms, and I don't know if that's how anxiety works. So we don't have measurements in New Zealand at the moment for concussion. So it's a 10 question questionnaire, or maybe a 60 question questionnaire. And different people will read it differently, and different people will ask questions differently. You know, what symptoms do you get? This. Oh, we think it's this. We think it's migraines. We think it's anxiety, and stuff like that. So it's a little bit all over the place in that side. However, there is a scan called a SPECT scan that I think is done quite a bit in America, and that actually accurately measures damage in terms of concussion, damage from drug use, damage from I don't know how Alzheimer's works, but it can actually track that damage as well.
Sort of like taking pictures of gray matter versus white matter, I think.
And it's something to do with circulation and stuff like that. Yes, I'm unsure how it works completely, but at least you can measure it. You can measure it, and therefore that you can manage it. We have a scan getting set up in Auckland. I was meant to get a scan this month, and that way I could accurately sort of measure what is happening with my head and make decisions from there. Because obviously, if it's anxiety, whether that was brought on from all of a sudden being an All Black and having more people watching me or whatever it was, pressures. I don't think it was that. I remember the head knocks and I remember feeling differently afterwards. But man, the amount of advice I've had from specialists saying, just go back and play. I just think we're loose in New Zealand and we haven't quite got there. So I've been cleared to play essentially by some people for over a year now. And it doesn't make sense to me to play if I don't feel normal. And if I go to the gym 3 times a week and all of a sudden 3 times a week is too much. I've gone from being very resilient, very active to being, like I said, mainly uncomfortable and symptomatic still. So if I was to get the scan and it said, actually, you've got no damage at all, you're just an anxious mess, I would manage it appropriately. Since you can measure it appropriately, I would manage it appropriately and go on some sort of treatment that would let me play again. And apologise to everyone for being a sook for the last 3 years, 2.5. And then
there's half a year where you can just sort of chalk it up to like, it's 2020, man.
Yeah, COVID got in the way. If once I get that, I can make all my decisions. So if that means playing again, I'd be pumped to play again. Even if we just created a new form of rugby post-COVID, where we had special teams and I was in the scrum team, even if that was the case, that'd be perfect. But if it comes back and it says you've definitely got damage from concussions, then I'd say, well, it's time to move on. And I don't mind moving on. What I don't like is not knowing what's wrong with me when I've had so many specialists say different things. So I'd like to measure it appropriately via the SPECT scan and then make decisions based on the results and then manage it correctly. So whether that means playing, perfect. If that means moving on to refereeing and coaching, I'm fine to do that too.
Yeah. Well, again, like that's a very, very different, like very contrasting comment, like as an American, like not me, but in America where it's just like, hey man, we're going to pump you with this. We're going to tape this down and you're going to go out there and you're going to do your job and you're going to play for this sports team, and when you get hurt, we're going to throw you to the side, which I don't think happens in rugby culture, anywhere. But it is like really refreshing, because again, like another guy, Liam Squire, who sort of, took himself out of the running, at least that's what I read, right? Is what he took himself out of the running for the World Cup squad, for the same deal, like he didn't feel like he was right. He didn't feel like it was an appropriate thing to do to put himself in that situation. And I don't know too many people, like that would do that. That would like say like, hey man, like this isn't right. I'm not going to do this, like, not even like give it a go. I'm going to go to Japan and see how it works out. They're just like, no, like he knew then, like as you do, and I'm going to take care of myself. And I think a lot of that is cultural, like between different places in the world. You sort of seem that like you started in coaching, so you have that view of like, I'm not going to be a rugby player forever, but I want to be around rugby. So, like there's ways to stay involved with the game. And I think some of that's lost on young players. I was like, I'm 20, this is the time. I was like, maybe like you could play rugby, here and there for the rest of your life, golden oldies or touch and refereeing and coaching. There's all these different ways to sort of stay involved with the game and find joy from it. And I think just, at least in this country, it's very different, like a very different outlook. I wouldn't know very many 20 to 9-year-old people that would say like, hey, I've got a shot at the All Blacks. Like, nah, I'm not gonna do it.
Yeah, I think for me that was the key. I wanted to coach after rugby, and I still do. I coach at the moment, and I referee at the same time. And that was how I was before I ever was a professional rugby player. and I always knew that if I was feeling the way I do, in these last 2.5, 3 years, it will get in the way of coaching. It does, already. Coaching last year, I can't coach for long periods of time, or if I do, I get quite, grumpy / ragey, which isn't good for coaching. High school kids.
That might just be high school kids, man. Like
Yeah.
that's a universal thing in this country and that country, I think.
Yeah, but, so I sort of always knew that that was where I was going, that where I was gonna finish, and if anything's going to get in the way of that, including symptoms or ongoing symptoms, then I'm fine to give that sort of part away, and then just the accurate measurement of it. I'd like to sort of see New Zealand take or rugby take a stance on how we measure concussions and damage, and then you can manage it effectively. Because once you can measure it, you can manage it, and whether that's compulsory iron necks or that stuff, and it's not giving the old iron neck a pump. It's something that I had during that year that I got concussed to, and wasn't something that I was using a lot at the time. It was something that I got to chug into my program and didn't use as much. And I always sort of questioned if I had a stronger neck, would I have sort of gone through this? And it's something that I've become quite passionate about in terms of that sort of stuff, because we don't have preparation to stop us from getting concussed. I hear there are diets that can help treat concussion that aren't utilised in New Zealand. Essentially, the medical system was, what did you do before you were concussed? And for me, it was running 25 to 30 Ks a week, playing a game 30 times a year, gymming 4 times a week, and then certain different things. So then they'll say, okay, where are you at now? And it might be walking. So they'll try and load manage you all the way back to where you were and without symptoms. But it doesn't work like that, because I've never got close once to having, and then of course the meetings on top of that. So I've never got close once to ever getting back to where I was. And that's essentially our treatment system in New Zealand. Where were you? Okay, let's try to get you back there slowly until you feel okay. And then if you don't feel okay within a year, no, you're anxious. That's all you are. So it's strange. It's a strange way to treat people, but it's just the way we are, because we don't have accurate ways to measure. So so back to what we were sort of saying before. People like Liam Squire, he knows what he wants. And as far as I know, it's sort of hunting and fishing and living the life on a farm and enjoying that. And if injuries were to get in the way of the long-term future of that, he's fine to make sure that it doesn't. And that's the same as me. I want to coach and be involved in rugby for the rest of my life. And if taking more head knocks was to threaten that, I'm fine to give it away.
Yeah, it's probably sad to say, but like it is super refreshing just to hear that, and again, like not to like harp on our next too much, but like in my time with them, trying to reach out to things like the Centers for Disease Control, and people who are sort of hand down information. There's a shocking lack of information about prevention. There's some very lip service things that they do about return to play. Can you go to school? Okay, you can go to school for a week. You can run for 20 minutes without a headache. Great. Okay, now get back out there. Put your football helmet back on. And get out there and get the slamming. And
sometimes I feel like that's to prevent like litigation stuff. Hey, players are coming to them and saying, hey, we've got issues you didn't want us about. And they're like, actually, we did warn you about it. We said you should take 3 weeks off, and here you go taking 1 week off. Like sometimes I'm just like, it's all over the place. You do the bare minimum to make sure you can cover yourself that side. But I think instead of bare minimum or somewhere in between, we should be doing as much as possible in New Zealand rugby or world rugby or whoever, to make sure we're as informed as possible. Because do I regret anything that sort of happened? No. If I had my time again, I'd still play those same games and take those same head knocks. What I would change though was the management and the measurement afterwards, if I could, because rugby's a rough game. Rugby's something that I've always enjoyed. I always expected some uncomfortable pain post footy and post career. I always worked really hard to make sure that I was injury free, and that included hiring my own trainer and Glenn Stewart, and the best people I could find to make sure that I wasn't injured post-career and I could move around really well. But that's the only thing I'd change. I don't mind taking the head knocks. I don't mind taking any other knocks. But my expectation was that on the medical side, people knew how to handle me. People knew how to make sure there was no long-term damage, and made sure they knew how to measure and manage effectively.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So we're gonna play. It's like a word association. We're gonna go hard as, right. We're gonna rate some scrums real fast. So you played against the Canada and America in Philadelphia.
Yep.
You've played South Africa. You've played against some of the best scrums in the world.
Yep.
So just from that tour of the Maori All Blacks, USA scrum from 10 being hard as, 1 being soft as wool.
I wouldn't say it's hard for me to say soft. I know it's meant to be quick fire. I wouldn't say anyone's soft. I would just say maybe technically off. You know what I mean? But in terms of America, I would rate them a 5.
Oh, not so bad, boys. Not so bad. Canada, I feel like would probably be more technically sound.
When I scrummed against them, maybe not. I only played against them once.
We watched them play in 2011 in New Zealand, and they shocked some people. They had a tough pool, and since then they seemed like, I read lots of different things, but like a lot of Canadian club and administrators and players and things sound a lot like American rugby players. Were like, where's the money going? Like, where's all the results and stuff, and that sort of thing. But in your experience versus Canada,
I'll say 4.
Hit them hard, man. Okay, South Africa. 57-0 South Africa.
Oh well, actually, I played terribly in that game actually, and I didn't get pumped, but I sort of did in the first 2 or 3 scrums, or maybe the first 2. And there's a couple of things going wrong that week. But in terms of actually physically getting beaten up at scrum time, which hasn't happened, in terms of a consistent sort of, sometimes you get those games where no matter what you do, you're just getting your ass kicked the whole game.
It's not on. Yeah, like you just can't. Some days you're just like, if I can get to this point, if I can get to where I want to be, like I'm immovable.
Yeah.
And the next week, like you get
I'm
can't.
talking absolutely destroyed every scrum. That's what I'm like. There's a game where I was scared for the next scrum. I'm like, this is gonna be terrible. And it was actually a club game when I was a 19-year-old boy playing against this big Māori club from outside of Whakatane called Te Teko. Just outside of Whakatane, there's this club called Te Teko, and the whole front row were ex-Bay Plenty and Chiefs players. I was a 19-year-old kid. I was trying to bore in a little bit, and because that's what I got taught to do.
Yeah.
Guy slips his by and punches me straight in the head and goes, "You keep your head out of there, boy." and then we just got our ass kicked for the rest of the game. So that would be the biggest hiding I've ever got as a scrummager, where it's just like, and physically we got beaten up, we got pushed backwards, I got my head punched in for putting my head where they didn't like it. So I've never received any beating, never received really a hiding like that at international or Super Rugby level. The closest I would have got was with the Highlanders, where we had quite a few personnel changes for a quarterfinal, and I think our scrum conceded about 16 points to lose the quarterfinal. Highlanders vs Sharks 2014 maybe. That's probably the biggest hiding. So in terms of South Africa, I'll give the Sharks an 8 and South Africa, the team, a 7.
Interesting. Very cool. Do you feel like there's a big difference in scrummaging between Northern Hemisphere and Southern Hemisphere? Like, I've sort of checked in with players. I've gone to different places and played against all kinds of different people. But at the test level, though, like a European team, do you feel like there's different tactics, or is it really just about the same thing? That's how you get to that point, I guess, is sort of the art of it. Because technically we want to get the same spot, but like how we get to that spot, I think once we come together, like that's what I think separates the difference, and like someone like a
Yeah.
Mike Braun who, like he drills that position into you. I imagine, from the videos that I've seen and the things that I've
Yep.
heard about him, like what, you can get to that position. I think it's then on sort of the individual to make sure that you get there. Do you find
Yeah,
it's tough?
yeah, unsure. I don't know if I don't know if Northern Hemisphere and Southern Hemisphere are trying to get to the same spot. In New Zealand, what we're actually mainly worried about is ball quality out the back of the scrum. So can we attack off it? Tony Brown, I remember him talking about the coach of the Highlanders, Japan. Who's the coach still? Japan, Tony Brown.
Yeah.
Oh, and the Highlanders. He's back again. Anyway, he always said that as an attack coach, he stopped programming moves off scrums because they never came about. So he started to care a lot more about lineouts. Then we got a scrum coach, Mark Del Masso, French guy, awesome, very influential in my scrummaging career alongside Mike Crum. He sort of changed New Zealand scrummaging, and the ball quality all of a sudden got a lot higher, and sort of a lot of we've been sort of living off of his sort of philosophy a little bit ever since. And all of a sudden, Tony Brown was quite happy to program off of scrums. So New Zealand, we're probably more about ball quality, lightning. We call it LQB, I think, lightning quick ball. I think we still call that.
I have some Kiwi friends that call it that too.
Yeah. So what's that?
2 seconds, lightning quick ball.
Exactly. So, and I guess we're more about the TQB, I guess, for scrums. We're top quality. Where can we attack off it? Whereas if it's sort of quite messy, that's sort of terrible for us. Whereas I think in Northern Hemisphere, maybe they use it as a physically dominate them.
French rugby seems like particular, right? Like they just sort of hold it in the back until someone collapses and they want their penalty and their shot at goal. Like it's a different intent.
I talked about this with someone, and they said that in Northern Hemisphere they love set piece, so they don't mind resetting off, going for a scrum, and then of course they love penalties and stuff like that too. Points wherever you can get them, and I'm fine with that. Scrum for a penalty, restart again 30 metres, 40 metres down the field with your lineouts that you practice a ton of during the week. And that's where they base a lot of their attacks. So that makes sense to hold the ball into scrum and go for that penalty because you get to reset 40 metres down the field. Whereas in New Zealand, again, attack mindset is a little bit different too. Whereas, is it 40%? It's a high percentage. I can't remember. It might be 60% of tries are scored within the first three phases. So because of that, it's easier to attack off of turnover ball. So we prefer high phases, kicking a little bit more, possibly to score tries off those first three phases. So I guess it's just different ways of thinking. And as a result, because the end point is different, the beginning point has to change too. So slightly different, more physical and more dominating in the Northern Hemisphere. And in the Southern Hemisphere, we care about our strike, what our strike looks like off of the scrum, so that we can score within the first three phases. And just top quality ball is something that was always sort of drilled into us. I was in between. I wanted to kill people for fun, but I also learned to care about TQB afterwards.
Yeah, something about a scrum. I interviewed a lady named Sarah Shabbat, and she was a rugby player here in the States for a long time, and she played center and she played this, and she played different positions, and they selected her for the Eagles, so the ladies, to play Canada and England and like a super series. And then when she arrived, told her that she'd be a loose head prop. And she said, she's throwing a fit, took her dip out. What is happening right now? Like, you're going to make me play this position. And now she speaks, she's to the Church of Scrum now. Like she 100% just wants to get in there, and she's just a full passionate lover of scrummaging. The way that we talk about it, and as a lady coaching men, at our premier club level, teaching them you've got to you got to get in here, you got to do these things, you've got to get nasty, and it's I try to explain it to people, but it's just one of those things where it's like, why do you sign up to play club rugby? You're mid-30s, why are you doing that? It's like, I'll never be able to put it into words or explain to you why that's important to me. why someone knocks on a ball and everyone sort of looks up like this. I'm like,
Yeah.
we're gonna bump these guys right now.
Yeah.
We're gonna show them, and guys, it's just an unreal like feeling, to get sort of 8 people stuck together and do something like that collectively. And I think it speaks a lot to the game, like just being a part of a rugby club, like being part of something bigger than you, like you want to contribute to that helps you in a way. And like a church, like you always going to give more to a church than you get back from it. And a rugby club isn't any different than that, like you put in your whole life to it, and what you'll get out of it isn't financial. It's all about, you as a person and what you want out of life. So yeah, man, like scrums, I think that everyone should have to do it. I was really interested in hearing you saying that you referee, because there aren't very many front row referees running around. And I feel like that could settle a few debates, pundits and people talking online with microphones and fancy headphones and things like that. Like they're referees. I watched some of the 2017 Lions tour today, like watched the Crusaders game. I've watched them all before, obviously, but like I've watching them and watching that little French guy with the whistle sort of just blowing up stuff as Cody Taylor and all these guys come on top of them, and they're just like grabbing, just like the excitement and the emotion in it, and they're like for dominance, penalized before, so. And then I heard Eddie Jones speak a little bit about the rules he would change. And one of the ones he specifically listed, top 2 for him, was taking a shot at goal after a scrum penalty. He would change the options, like as a reset scrum. So as a coach and a player and a referee, like I wondered, how do you feel like scrums have gone? Right? They get a bad rap because they blame them for the ball out of play and the amount of time that it takes. So like, what would you change about it? Like, how would you keep what we love about scrummaging in the game and also keep, the ball in play and make other people happy?
I guess a couple of ways. One, in New Zealand, we always talk about triple threat attack. It's when we're attacking, we want to be balanced with how we carry, how we pass, and how we kick. So, for example, if you think about Pacific Island teams, they carry more than they kick and they pass. Maybe if we were to rank them in the triple threat attack, they would carry 1, pass 2, kick 3. And I haven't watched as much Pacific Island rugby as I should, but that's my memory of it. The island teams love carrying the ball. If we think about England, maybe old school England, it could be kick number 1. It could be carry number 2 and pass 3. That's just rough. That's not educated. That's just a perception thing. Whereas in New Zealand, we want to be balanced across the 3. We want to be able to kick, pass, and carry, and be balanced across 3, and that makes you harder to defend. But I think there's one facet missing, and that's push. So it should be four-pronged attack. It should be kick, pass, carry, and push. And pushes, you can scrum for penalties or you can maul. I count pick and goes and then the push part as well. I've never counted pick and goes as pure carry because it ends up being quite a bit of a push. So I sort of, when I coach, I have a four-pronged attack mindset, and that's kick, carry, pass, and push, and trying to be balanced across it. So the most balanced team that I could think of in those 4 areas, kick, carry, pass, and push, would be the Crusaders. They can maul, they can scrum, they kick very well, they pass very well, and they carry very well. And it's very balanced. And as a result, it makes them quite hard to defend, because if they're just going to carry, you nail your tackle, you nail your tracking, you nail maybe slow them down at ruck time. But if they kick as well, all of a sudden you have to start chucking more people in the backfield, which weakens your front field just a little bit. If they're going to pass quite a lot more too, you have to be very good at line speeding and cutting down that pass. But if you can't defend their scrum and you can't defend their maul too, then they'll just go there. So and that makes me think a lot of the World Cup final, where who knows how much better, I don't know if that was a proper structured sentence, how better, oh God, who cares? Who knows if England were better than South Africa in every other part of the field. One part we know they weren't better was the push area. So sometimes the cool thing about being very balanced in your attack is if your kick, carry, and pass isn't working, go to push, see how that's going, and that might start creating more opportunities for you. So I think Eddie Jones is incorrect, and Eddie Jones, who knows why, wants it to happen because I think it's such a that's why he wants it to happen, because he lost a World Cup final on the back of push.
Right.
Yeah, so
100%.
and I disagree with him, because if you're not balanced enough to turn up to have all four of those areas ready, then you got out coached, unfortunately. Or South Africa were just lucky enough to have the better scrum on the day, and there was certain things wrong with your scrum. But that's how rugby is, and that's the beauty of rugby. Kick, carry, pass, and push should be a focus for every rugby team's attack, and it just gives you so many ways to play the game. And then on the refereeing side of it, referees just don't know scrums as well as they should. And I think one of the reasons is because maybe a lot of front rowers don't know scrums as well as they should. And that sounds like an arrogant thing to say. But I think what happens is we know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we know the feel of scrums more than we know the words to it. And someone,
like, it's not always words that make, like, you can't always express what's going on, and that's the skill of a great coach, is being able to put all those things into like digestible pieces of information for young people and old people and everyone in between.
Yeah, like that's the art of coaching, isn't it? Where it doesn't matter what you say; it matters what picture you create in the person's head that you're trying to teach, and that normally means less words, more descriptive words, and stuff like that. And I guess being a referee and a coach and a player, I think I can think three different ways sometimes, and because of that, because I'm a front rower and a referee, I'm trying to think of ways to explain to referees, and sort of have been working on that for a couple of years. But also commentators don't. So referees let us down by not knowing, and hopefully that's something that I can help out in any way that I can. I visit referee associations. I'm part of the Tasman Marco, essentially, referee association here, and referee week in, week out. Also, commentators do us a bit of a disservice where they sort of laugh and say, I've got no idea what's happening there, and as a result, the public miss out on as much education as possible. And they laugh about it being the dark arts, but I've never seen it as the dark arts. I've been to some jiu-jitsu classes, and the principles are the same: create space, find space, close space. The principles are very similar. So I've been lucky enough to be hired by Sky Sport as a commentator as well. Recently, I commentated Sharks vs Highlanders for my first Super Rugby game. Because of COVID, I've been pulled out of my other 5 sort of gigs I got given. But so I've sort of just been so lucky with rugby, and it's just something that I've worked on and worked and just put so many hours into, I guess, and they're lucky enough to be rewarded with all these random jobs.
Yeah.
And that's sort of, but I'm still so passionate about scrums, and as an attack coach, I'd make sure push was part of it. As a referee, I'd make sure it's officiated correctly so that the dominant team is actually getting the rewards. And as a commentator, I'm hoping to be able to explain it where referees watching can be educated, where people watching can be educated, and come away from the game thinking, oh, actually, that makes so much sense to me, and it should be part of our attack, and it should be, and now I know why South Africa won. And the only law I would change in terms of scrums, I might change the wording of scrums, or some of the laws, but the only real law I would change would be when the time starts again. Time only starts when the scrum engages, crouch, bind, set. Time starts when you set, and if it's a reset, you stop the clock again until it sets again. So that would be my only law I would change. Time doesn't keep running while you can wind the clock down. I know as a coach myself, if I have someone in the bin, my scrums take a lot longer to set
Absolutely. Yeah.
Than any other time. So I think if we change that, we can maybe at least take that hassle out of the game. It does eat up a lot of time, and it's frustrating for people who don't understand scrums. So my job is to help people understand it a little bit, and then also if I could change a law, it would be time starts on set. Crouch, bind, set, time starts.
Yeah, it'd be great just not to listen to Justin Marshall bitch about it anymore. Just like, we get
Boom,
it. You don't like it. Yes. Keep saying it, man. That's great. Like, that's a great one. But yeah, I remember he was quoted as like, yeah, we should play on unofficial surfaces and get rid of scrums. Scrums should be uncontested.
Yeah, and that'll, like, I wouldn't be surprised if heaps of backs think of stuff like that. Because they
like, I listened to his podcast, and he's like, I don't know what they're doing there. Like,
Yeah.
I was like, man, you're just too slow to be a center, so you became a flanker, and now you think you can just get rid of scrums. Like, you were an open-sided flanker. You got 70 tests for England. You don't want to see scrums anymore. He's like, whatever.
I think some people just, I don't know what it is. You know, sometimes I think of rugby as like CrossFit a little bit. I don't know if that's a popular thing to say, but one thing I always liked about CrossFit was how diverse it was, how diverse you had to be very good at it. You have to be able to lift heavy, run fast, run for long periods of time, have different skills where you're accurate in your technical swimming, aiming for stuff. I always quite enjoyed that side of CrossFit and made so much sense to me. I mean, that's what rugby is for me sometimes. Not only do I have to be able to kick, carry, pass, I need to know how to push too. Backs will never know. Halfbacks will never know what that's like. Most referees will never know what the push side of rugby is like. But at least the forwards, in my mind, should know a little bit. So Haskell's let us down there. Terrible human being. Strike him off.
Yeah. English. I think he's Welsh technically. He admitted he was Welsh and that he traveled over after under 20s.
I'm not surprised that English don't like scrums at the moment. For the next 4 years they won't like scrums, and then they'll lose something else at the World Cup and they'll find something else not to like. Goal kicking maybe.
Drop goals. If they would have lost on the drop goal.
Yeah. All of a sudden outlaw drop goals.
No more. Well, he's around, I guess. Eddie's around till 2023, so we'll see what he gets into.
Oh, and by the way, touching on Eddie too, I keep hearing how amazing he is. Like some of the best coaches in the world, you know, especially one that's getting a lot of reps at the moment, Brad Thorne, but he is obviously a very good coach. But Tony Brown is one of the guys I had on the breakdown and was asking a lot of questions, and I got to talk to him afterwards on the trip back to the hotel. And I said, who do you think some of the best coaches in the world? He said, who do you think the best coaches in the world are? He said two people, Wayne Smith and Eddie Jones. So he just said Eddie Jones is just one of the most clever people in the world. It disappoints me that he wants to get rid of scrums, but I still respect him just on the back of Tony Brown saying he's amazing.
Yeah. I met Eddie Jones training session. I moved to Colorado, and my girlfriend at the time is now my wife, you know, and we moved out of college. Like, we're going to go and play for this Glendale Raptors. Like, they got a stadium, you know, first one in America. We get out there, and Scott Johnson was the head coach of the Eagles at the time. And Scott was trying to do a lot of great things. And he eventually was released by USA Rugby because he wanted, you know, he felt like he was paid too much money. He wanted to give that money to the players. So they'd become professional athletes and train and raise the standard of the game. They didn't like that very much. They let Scott go. But he brought his good buddy Eddie to a Glendale Raptors training facility, but there was snowing, so we weren't allowed on the field. So we were down the street at this field, right, like with a one light generator, like over here. Yeah. It's snowing, you know, and and Eddie was there, like, you know, just like handing out some orders, like, hey, we're going to do a couple of things, and we're going to do them really well. And like, I remember, like, he used to coach Australia, and like to see him go on and do a few things, like, you know, fuck, like, I should have had my notepad out. You know, I should have been like, I should have followed him back to his car until he told me to leave me alone.
Yeah, yeah.
And it just doesn't dawn on you always, you know, like who you got in front of you.
I think for me it would, because I've just been rugby obsessed since I was a kid. I've pestered many a rugby player and coach since I was a young kid. I'm an absolute pest when it comes to asking questions about rugby.
I don't know. It might just be personality-wise. Well, you know, he probably gets hounded all the time. I don't want to bother him. You know, it's like, when are you ever gonna have him at your practice again? You know, like, never. Yeah. So, oh well. And I saw some cool things about Warren Gatlin. You know, I listened to his story on Rugby Pass. Like what it's almost like yourself. Like, just like, oh, here's an opportunity. Like, oh, you can come and check this out if you want. Like, oh, do you want to coach Ireland now? Like, here's the reins for Ireland for the rest of the Six Nations. You're gonna do this. You're gonna come back to Waikato, do this thing, and then, like, you know, like, he's left Britain and he's gonna be the Lions, you know, coach next year, which is
crazy.
It's just a testament to like how good he is. You know, like how good of a coach he must be, and unreal, like, just mind for the game. Did you overlap with him?
No,
He was gone.
Never been coached by him. Don't think I've even seen him in real life. It's sort of a person I've always wanted to. Him and Schmidt, are two people I sort of want to meet and ask plenty of questions and observe trainings. And yeah, you know, I've sort of met so many great coaches. Wayne Smith, never been coached by Graham Henry, but turned up to every coaching course that I could get to when I was a young RDO. Obviously, plenty of coaches, Hansen, Mike Cron, who's one of the best deliverers I've ever met in terms of delivering rugby knowledge, Mike Cron. And Razor, you know, sort of travelled to Malaysia with him and got to understand a little bit, and he helped me out quite a bit, and I've known him ever since. You know, there's just some great coaches, Tony Brown, that I've been coached by, and yet I don't think I've even met Warren Gatlin, and have never met Schmidt either. So two people I'm definitely hoping to get to meet down the line and ask plenty of questions from.
Fantastic.
Eddie would be awesome too.
Yeah.
Eddie would be absolutely fantastic to meet and ask those sorts of questions.
Knowing what I know now, like I can't imagine like just me not tugging on the sleeve, like, hey bud, like just hold on one more, like, you know, like knowing what I know now. Yeah, we'll have to talk about that Malaysia trip with Razor later, I guess. But like I saw him in San Diego. I was here in San Diego. I was walking through, like we got offered, like, oh, we can't go. Do you want to go to this Padres baseball game? Like, yeah, we'll go. So I take my boy and my daughter, and we're gonna go and, you know, buy some overpriced beers and popcorn. And we're scooting through, you know, the aisles, and it's Razor and another guy, and he's dressed down, jeans, pointy shoes, you know, classic Kiwi, like dressed down, and he's just rocking through like the aisle, and I was like, Coach, hey coach, like whoa, like, hey man, how's it going? Like, great job, you know, like you just got done winning Super Rugby. So I laid all that on him, right? Like, man, big fan, way to go. And he kept waiting for my accent, like, to come out, you know? And, like, at the end of it, I said all this stuff to him, and he's like, how do you know who I am? Like, how do you know me? Like, you're from here? I'm like, yeah, I'm from San Diego. And he's like, how do you know who I am? Like, just blown away that I recognized him, like, out of the crowd. And I was like, well, I don't want to take any more of your time, right? And let him go. I was like, fucking did it again. Like, had him locked up. Had another one locked up and just let him walk away. I was like, ah, man, I gotta get better at taking my shots when I've got them, I think.
Yeah, just think of the biggest question you can sort of think of number one and number two question that you sort of want to ask, and ask both of them just every single time. Just have it ready. Actually, now that I say that, I don't do that. I just ask 10 questions until they give me this sort of sideways, starting to stand to the side and look at their watch. Maybe look at the door, a couple of glances to the door. Like, oh, maybe it's time to let them go.
Yes, I can see you're getting itchy, but I don't care. I'm gonna Oh man, right on. Man, it's so great to talk to you. I don't want to keep you too long. We've been on for a little while, but
how long have we been on for?
I can't tell. Maybe like just over an hour, I think.
Oh, it's gone real quick. It's been a good chat.
Well, that's good to hear, man. Like, I'm glad that.
You haven't let me finish ranking the rest of the scrums, though. We got to South Africa. Surely there's more scrums to rank.
Let's do it. Wales. I'm really interested in Wales.
Oh, interesting. I only got to play Wales once, and I don't know what his name was. Tom Francis, yeah. And I thought I was going to destroy him, and I didn't. And I was still sort of suffering through concussion stuff at the time, and I knew that I was a bit weird and that sort of stuff, but I thought I was still scrummaging very well. Concussion doesn't affect your scrummaging, I don't think, but I do remember sort of just being out of it with rugby. I wasn't as clear and that sort of stuff as I usually would, so I sort of thought, you know, man, there's a real chance I can get this guy. And I didn't. Long story short is I didn't. He might have got me a couple of times, I might have got him a couple of times, but I didn't get as dominant as I wanted to be. So, and like I was saying before with the South African scrum, maybe in the first couple of scrums I might get, you know, overpowered a little bit being a smaller guy, but then maybe I'll work out a few issues, and 80% of the time I feel like I'm on top. Whereas with this guy, Tom Francis, is it?
Yeah.
Yep. With this guy, I didn't feel like, you know, it could have been 50-50, so it'd be tough for me to rank him low. So I'd say 7 or 8 for Wales on my one time playing Wales.
Yeah, I remember watching a game, you know, and I was really excited to watch Wales, New Zealand. You know, Wales had been played really well, won the Six Nations that year, and he came on for the first scrum of the game, and I forget who it was, but somebody took him out and parked him on top of the second row.
Joe Moody.
Yeah,
Joe
I've
Moody.
never looked at it the same. I was like,
Yeah.
oh, he's a great rugby player.
But
I
it
watched
was
him
stuff
play
like,
Exeter, like, fantastic rugby player, but like,
yeah,
comes down to a scrum, I'm like, he's gonna get folded. Like,
yeah, and I think sort of arrogantly, that's why I thought, maybe I could kill this guy, because I'd seen what Joe Moody did to him, and
looked like a James Bond villain, just fucking out the top of the
Oh, there's so many, as you'd know, there's so many things that sort of make that happen. His lock probably didn't help him out a bit, and Joe Moody's hooker probably did, a good number on him as well.
But I watched Joe Moody destroy Tyg Furlong, who's like, watched it today, and like they were penalized. Crusaders were penalized first 2 scrums of that game against the Lions in 2017. The third one, it was like on the touch line on the right hand side, and they just picked the whole thing up, like, and Moody was leading the charge, and they all ended up on the sideline. Everyone giving it to him, and like Sam Whitelock is there, like in the bottom of the pile. Lions are coming up bleeding and stuff, and it was just like that was. I mean, he must be able to generate an unreal amount of power at loose head to be able to.
But also just the Crusaders scrum. So I was going to touch on it at the end of this if you didn't ask, about the best scrum I've ever faced was the Crusaders, and not just Crusaders with Owen and Joe Moody, Crusaders whoever they are, because and just like it would have been in Greg Somerville's time and whoever that, because the Crusaders just have that mentality that they do everything well, and that may include the scrum time where everyone has to contribute, and that's not the case with every other team I've played with. Different people, like different flankers don't scrum. I won't name anyone, but there's some flankers and locks that treat scrum in professional level, and plenty of my professional teams, as a rest time, but that's not accepted down in the Crusaders, and you can tell every time you play against them. So, for example, the top 3 scrums I would have played against, that I would have scrummed against, one would be the Crusaders, 2 would be Chiefs scrum trainings, where everyone has to, sometimes when you have scrum trainings, everyone pushes and everyone, because it's the scrum training, but for some reason during the game, the scrum isn't a scrum for some flankers. It's a chance to tackle the 10 in about 10 seconds time, so he doesn't participate. But at scrum trainings, of course, they all participate, and if I have to scrum against Nepal Lala, one of the best tight heads I've ever scrummed against, it's rough. You get away from those scrum trainings, just like, man, that's the worst scrum session I've ever been in terms of pain and uncomfortable, and that's just good. And that's just because you've got 8. But yeah, I know, a bit shorter afterwards. And that's because you've got 8 people participating for 20 minutes, just going as hard as they can because it's a scrum training. Unfortunately, they didn't always take that attitude toward the field, whereas the Crusaders do. I'd struggle to think what Crusaders scrum trainings are like, because the same attitude they take there, I'm pretty sure they take to the field. And then the third one, not in terms of any order, would be All Black scrum training. Same thing again. You're scrumming against some of the best people with great attitudes to how they participate, and it's some of the toughest scrum trainings you can come up against in terms of pressure. You've got 8 world-class people on one side, 8 world-class people on the other side, absolutely going for it.
And some crazy old guy telling you how to beat, like whispering how to beat, and then going to the other side and whispering how to beat.
He's Micron.
That must just be like an epic session. Like I started watching rugby, late for me, like 2002, 2003. And then watching that first, World Cup, getting hooked immediately. And there were times, I think, where the Australian scrum, like they would, like guys like Al Baxter and a few guys, like whatever the reason was, like the scrum was just like a liability. Like they knew it, and they didn't put any effort into it at all. Like they'd get into a scrum, they'd pull it down, there'd be a penalty, and then, George Smith and these guys would like leap back to get back on side and then come forward, like to sort of bring the line up. But then, enter like Rodrigo Roncero into that camp, and like became very good scrummagers, like between 2011 and 2015. So I just wondered, like if your experience with the Australian scrums, and they seem like a country that always, like if you're 4-pronged attack, whatever they have on you, like that's what they'll use, and they always seem to find a way like to win games and win big games.
Yeah, I think they call it.
Out.
I think they call it ruck and run rugby attack over there. It's just, you know, real quick rugby. And Tony Brown talked about attacking faster than the other team can defend. Not everyone does that. Sometimes, you know, you'd get to a ruck and the halfback would survey the options and go from there. But while you're halfback surveying the options, the defense is getting set and starting to understand just who they are on and having conversations. You're on him, no, I'm on him. And they're getting set. Whereas that's what Tony Brown talks about, attack faster than they can defend. Don't give them time to figure out who they're on. That's where you're going to create the mistakes. So Australia, I think, created that. You know, they're widely credited for creating that ruck and run rugby, which many people have copied. So yeah, if they're going to find something, it's that. But they haven't found it very often in the last couple of years. I keep hearing about how the coaching levels over there aren't super high, and whether they like it or not, coaches run teams. So if a team's doing well, you should always look at the coaches first. And if a team's doing terribly, you should always look at the coaches first. So, yeah, you know, and that's probably what they've been struggling with for the last couple of years. And Dave, and it's not just one person, you know, Brad Thorne's a very good friend of mine. And I know they've sort of done some good recruiting in the coaching areas, and I'm hoping the Reds do very well. Go the Reds. Better pump the Reds up while I got my old hoodie here. Big Reds fan. Go the Reds.
There you go.
But yeah, Dave Rennie will be with Australia, so I know exactly sort of, you know, their counter-attack's about to take a lift. Their detail around their attack and counter-attack's going to take a lift whenever they get to play again. And then it depends who he has around him, you know. In terms of the four-pronged attack that I like to think about, carry and pass is about to get better for Australian rugby, but I don't know about kick and push. So it depends really who he's got around him. And Dave Rennie, whether, you know, because I respect Dave Rennie, he's definitely, I should have listed him before as one of the great coaches I've been coached by. He's influenced me quite a lot. The one thing I know that he didn't do a lot of was kick. I was always grated me a little bit because I went from the Highlanders, where I agreed with Tony Brown, kick as much as possible and attack where you want to be, but also when they kick back, you get that a chance at a counter-attack again. Tony Brown loves kind of counter-attack, so kick as much as possible. The Chiefs were completely different. Hold on to the ball, starve the other team of possession, and create as many phases as possible. And I didn't always agree with it, but it still worked at some stage for the Chiefs. But it wasn't working for us when I was there. So in terms of, you know, I'm sure whoever he's got around him is what it's going to look like. But I know Australia are going to improve greatly in their attacking detail under Dave Rennie.
They sound like they're very excited about it, you know, and like I think it's important for the game, you know, like to looking at like what happened in the USA Rugby, you know, filing bankruptcy here might have actually been a good thing for us, you know, like, and I'm a nobody, you know, like no one cares what I think, but you know, like I had a US team, you know, a governing body that was ill-equipped and unable to sort of deal with all the things in the country that needed to happen. It's a great big country, you know, like it's very hard like for competitions to sort of intersect. So like saying like, hey, it's on you guys as sort of geographical unions to sort of do that from now on, like I think is probably the best thing for us. But I don't think that that's true in Australia. Like I don't think that I don't think it would be a good thing if AR went down, you know, and just said, hey, listen, we can't afford to have competitions anymore. But I know it's a very unique blend in Australia because for a long time, you know, you go from club rugby to super rugby to the Wallabies. And if it's outside, you know, if it's a June test and you're a great club rugby player, you could be playing for the Wollongong Vikings one day, right? And get pulled up and be a Wallaby the next day. And like, you know, it speaks a lot to like their knowledge of the game and those sorts of things. But I think the lack of structure, like, and, you know, the ability for coaches and players and managers and referees and everyone to sort of get all of that, like that development has probably hurt them in the long run.
Yeah, well, it goes back to also, I think it goes back to what we talked about at the beginning. Too many people are tribal. You know, like some people won't let decisions be made because how does it affect my team? Someone in Queensland might be going, well, actually, even though this decision financially might make sense for rugby in Australia, it doesn't make sense for Queensland because we're making more money. You know, who knows if that's actually the case. Too many people are tribal, as opposed to the overlying principle is love of the game, and the overriding sport is rugby. Some referees have an issue with that too. You know, on every level, some people, when we're having issues, it's when people are loving their own clique, their own group, their own colour, their own, you know, club and franchise more than the love of the game. And I wouldn't be surprised if that's happening often in Australia, where people are halting decisions that need to be made for the benefit of rugby because it actually hurts them a little bit. So that's sort of how I feel about it sometimes, and I hear about it still happening in New Zealand, where some people won't let decisions be made, even though it's better for rugby, because it affects them terribly, you know. And that's how too many people are at the moment. Whereas first and foremost, go back to the love of the game. Even like little things like the Americans sort of disrespect in NBA, like where it's a thing. Like I watch video clips where like, look at this disrespect here from Steph Curry, and they pump up disrespect with you know, they pump up disrespect as being an attribute that you want in NBA.
Good job, you shit on that guy.
I'm like, well, I'm just like, oh god, and that's starting to filter through to New Zealand rugby. Just little things about how our athletes act is a bit sort of an American pumped up arrogance. Me first before my team, me first before the sport. I am the sport. You know what I mean? And that's terrible for me to say, because it's probably a bit of a over exaggeration of how it actually is. But still, there's, you know, and on the smaller form, it's there. But first and foremost, the game should come first, and then everything should be prioritized after that. And the values of rugby don't match that. Whereas it's creeping into the game at the moment. The you know, disrespect is now starting getting pumped up by commentators, you know, and it's something that I don't do when I commentate. If someone gets hurt in a tackle, I'm not going to pump up and say, oh, he's been destroyed, because I remember what happened to me when I got hit by someone, and I heard the commentator say, oh, Kane's been hit by a truck and he's still trying to find the truck that hit him. And I remember the disrespect that I felt when that stuff was said about me. I'm just like, oh, that doesn't deserve to be part of rugby. And nor am I going to let that be a part of rugby when I'm in that same position. And it's something that I've always sort of held on to. It's something I cringe at all the time when I see it. You know, I'd love to see rugby as a sport put first, and the values really decided on and accepted, and then every decision gets made out of that. Geez, that was a rant.
Yeah, it's all right. I mean, and you're not wrong. I don't think that it's disrespectful to say about American sport, because it is like primarily that way, you know. And the amount of like NBA basketball jerseys at an All Blacks training, like a weight session, like would suggest that, you know, there's a lot of people watching those games, you know, like it's sort of a sporting like society that you guys have there. And it's not just one sport, like, you know, anything where you're watching the best in the world compete, like you guys, you know, you guys dig that. And that's how me and, you know, my family and my sort of close-knit, you know, community are about things. Like, you know, my kids and I, like, obviously very bored, a lot of time on our hand these days, you know, school's out, no more remote schooling, so it's summer break, and it's like sumo wrestling, like, you guys want to check this out? Like, these guys do this 4 times a year, and the Emperor's Cup is a big deal, right? Like, stone lifting, you know, we've watched several documentaries on that lately. So we've been, you know, like, I get, like yourself, you know, I'm a big gym guy, like CSCS and strength conditioning coaching and things like that. So it's a big part of us and who we are. And there's way too much gym equipment in the backyard, which has saved us through this. But like anything where you're watching the best in the world compete, like, that's interesting. That's very, like, it's sailing, it's checkers, it's, you know, it's weird stone lifting from Basque or Scandinavia. Like, cool. Like, let's see these guys pick up a 200-kilo stone with their bare hands, you know, like in a t-shirt. Yeah.
But even, you know, like the even like the sort of crap talking, you know, Conor McGregor, he's not American, but when you try and beat someone up and the media jump on it and absolutely love it. Whereas I'd hate for it if rugby turned into that, you know. Sometimes it edges on it. Sometimes there's a little bit of an edge. The players don't do it as much. Where they're like, mate, we have heaps of respect for the opposition team and what they're trying to achieve. And I love that about rugby. I love the fact that we don't talk down the other team and try to get into their head. We want the best team to show up on the day, and hopefully we're better than them, you know? So I love that about rugby. I love the respect, and I don't want to see that go. I don't want to see us go the way of a UFC media conference where we're saying, yeah, England, you're a piece of shit, and you can't scrum. And then all of a sudden, you know, and that's our pre-match. That's our that's our, you know, I'd hate to say stuff like that, and see rugby go that way. I love the respect. I love the sort of, I love that side of the game, and I hope it stays forever. And disrespect being glorified would be an absolute travesty for our game, I think.
Yeah, like I really hope that it doesn't creep in, you know, any more than it has maybe. And it's a challenge. Like it's a challenge coaching young kids. My son is 4. My oldest son is 4. We signed him up to play under 8s, you know, here in San Diego, and it's you know, it's scrum cap and mouthpiece for some reason with flags. You know, they're like, no injuries. And that is just the purest form of it. You know, like they don't know what they're doing. They don't care what they're doing. They've got the same as dad. Yeah, like that's great. But then like 10, 12, 14 years old, you know, they're like scoring tries and doing, you know, and like it's full field, and all of a sudden like the attitude changes quite a bit, and it's a lot of it is just sort of expectations. Is like, hey man, like you're a great athlete, you know, and you did really well, but like, you know how many tries have been scored today, you know, playing rugby, like, you know, just the humility, I think, is something that is needed. Like that's what separates, you know, rugby from almost every other sport.
Yeah, I agree.
That and the values that it teaches, and you know, your 4-pronged attack mindset is, you know, a big evidence of that. Just because it is, you can't just be one-sided. You can't just be a specialist wide receiver. You're only going to play in the slot and catch, you know, 6 balls a year and go to the Super Bowl. Like you've got to. It's a great equalizer, right? Like you've got to be as well-rounded of a person, you know, and have those experiences so that you can appreciate, you know, other things in life and in rugby. So, yeah, I hope that we can keep it out of the game, as it were. All right, so we've got your top 3. We've got most of Europe, not everybody though. So, Scotland, I imagine Scotland, like just being in there, just being cold, like being in Edinburgh might be a rough go. But how do you rank? Did you play against Scotland at all?
Yeah, I did, and I wanted to scrum against VP Nell, who I keep hearing is awesome, but I didn't get to. I got to scrum against a guy Ferguson, who's an awesome ball carrier and very skillful around the park, but at the time wasn't a great scrummager. So I think we pumped them, and then so I would almost rank them a 3 or a 2, you know. And I know that sounds disrespectful to Scotland, but every time I'm ranking someone, I'm ranking the team of that day. You know what I mean? And Ferguson wasn't quite up to it that day. But geez, he's a good carrier. I've seen some highlight packages of him. He's an awesome rugby player around the field.
Really good the last few years, watching some games of Scotland. Like they didn't do, you know, I'm sure that they're disappointed in their World Cup last year, but I thought he was a real good, like very standout performer for them, ball in hand, active around the park. You know, him and McAnally and, you know, the other guys, Fraser Brown, those guys in the front row with him. But yeah, you got to win the set piece there.
This is the thing I'm excited about. When you play rugby, you focus so much on your own team. Brodie Retallick sort of got into trouble a couple of years ago where he couldn't name anyone in the other team, and it wasn't so much a disrespect thing, you know, because that's not how we are. We don't always focus a lot on the other team. In fact, a lot of time in New Zealand rugby, we're trying to focus mainly on ourselves, and we spend about 1 day a week, which is a Thursday, focusing on the other team, and that's you know, sort of maybe part of your defense day. So you don't get to learn a lot of the players in the other team. So when I played against Scotland, there's a lot of names I still don't know. There was a prop who was quite an athletic loosehead, a darker guy. He was awesome, but I don't know his name. But this is the cool thing about now that I don't play rugby. I'm starting to watch a lot more rugby and starting to know people's names again. You wouldn't know that in this chat because I forgot Tom Francis's name. And you know, but that's the best thing about going back into being a fan again. Is I'm starting to watch rugby and remember people and learn people's names rather than watching rugby only on a computer with clips that I fast forward and don't listen to the commentary. And I'm just looking at what they do and how they scrum or how they tackle and how they attack. But you don't put names to it. You put, it's just a system you're learning. It's an other team system you're trying to learn. You don't care so much about the names. That's what I'm excited about, because I'm hearing you talk about this history and naming all the names and your footy well, and obviously you're an awesome fan of the game. I'm looking forward to going back to that. Just knowing the names and knowing the history again. And I'm surprised that I even watched the same Haskell clip as you had from the podcast. But that's what I'm looking forward to, man. Just going back to being a fan and knowing all the names and reading the stories and watching the video clips. So you're awesome in all your knowledge of the game and inspiring me to go back.
Yeah. Well, Crusaders.
Way better beard than me too. Jeez, that's a fantastic beard. It was there before quarantine, and it's only getting thicker. It just keeps growing. So we're gonna see how it goes here. I think I got a sponsorship actually recently for my beard. I submitted some picture, and they go, "Oh yeah, here's some post about it." All right, I'll try. Crusaders play this weekend for the first time. They're playing the Hurricanes. I think I don't think Joe Moody's playing. I think they've got guys like Ollie Yager and some other guys sort of starting in those positions. So Hurricanes, you see Dane Coles again. Have you scrummed with Dane Coles? Because everyone wants to talk about how fast, awesome. What an athletic guy. Obviously, set skills, like throwing the ball in, doing those things, like hooking, obviously phenomenal, and then the speed on the wing. I've seen some great memes of 120, 140, 160 Dane Coles, some great ones like that. But scrummaging wise, what is Colesy bring to it? No, he's awesome, and he wouldn't have the test caps he would that he does if he wasn't. And no disrespect, and of course there would be no disrespect, but Asafo Amua, who is one of the fastest, most powerful guys going in the front row at the moment in New Zealand, hasn't got many test caps because of that. His scrummaging probably isn't up to par, and nor is his throwing just yet. And it costs teams because that's where a lot of your attack starts, scrummaging. And like I said before, where you can start so much of your attack from scrums and lineouts that you can't if your hooker's not hitting the mark, and you can't if your scrum's not as good as it could be. So not only is Dane Coles dynamic around the field and quick and has the skills, to sort of hang out on the edge and do very well there, but his scrummaging is very good and his throwing is on point as well. So like I said, Asafo could be one of the most powerful and skillful and quick front rowers going around in New Zealand rugby, but his test match numbers aren't as high because of the other things that he's probably missing. Whereas Dane Coles and Cody Taylor would be full package, not as powerful and as quick maybe as Asafo, but in terms of carry, pass, kick, who knows about kicking, carry, pass, push, even for them to throw, they're more balanced.
Yeah, gotta be, right? I mean, that's core skills, you gotta have those core skills in the front rows. So we'll see how the Hurricanes go. They've got a very young front row minus Dane Coles. Tyrell Lomax is a guy I think that.
He's awesome, Tyrell.
Yeah,
he's a Marco. He's awesome.
He's a great big unit. Young guy, playing a lot. In front of a guy like Ben May, who seems to be the ageless wonder. Every time they need someone in the Canes, they call that guy and he shows up and puts in the shift.
Yeah.
And has tons of caps for Maori All Blacks, and things like that. So should be interesting to see. They've got very different squad named for the Crusaders this weekend. So and then the Blues, no Dan Carter yet, I guess. That's all right. We don't know too much about that. But a guy who I think, and again, I'm nobody and know nothing, but a guy in Ofa Tungafasi who I think is the first pick. If the All Blacks are playing tomorrow, I don't see how he doesn't start at tight head. Him and Lala, I think, are just absolute units. But Tungafasi is he's been tackling so well, making a platform for the Blues to attack from. Just very active, it just seems like he's bigger and thicker and just smashing guys. And like, yeah, and I remember him being selected like as a 20-year-old guy to the Blues and running around in Super Rugby and stuff. So who's someone that you think right now, like at loose head or at tight head, you think that is like you've seen come through and like is a guy you're excited to watch?
Nipal's always up there. He's one of the best scrummagers at the tight head side and has been for a while. Offa's actually quite a bit behind. And then, again, it sounds disrespectful, but it's not in terms of scrummaging. But around the 30s, he's a beast, an absolute beast, and he's so strong. But in terms of the scrummaging side, Nipal would be, quite far ahead. And maybe even Tyrell Lomax could be slightly just in front on the scrummaging side. But Offa's just so balanced, he can scrum, he can do all the other things around the field too, and he's just so dedicated as well. I know converting to Islam has been huge for him in that sort of side of it, which is quite unusual for an island boy to go from Christianity to Islam. But in terms of guys coming through, there's a young fella sort of around here in Nelson, Luca Inch, who seems to be pretty good. There is Tyrell Lomax, of course. It's actually, I'm biased. I know I'm biased because it happens all the time. You look at NBA players listing, like Scottie Pippen might say, oh, LeBron James has got nothing on Michael Jordan. But of course he thinks that because she trained it day in, day out, thousands of days, however many years it was, but, at least hundreds of days with Michael Jordan. So you just get biased. And I can hear it in my voice already. I'm listing Nelson guys. Who I'm excited about coming through the ranks. But yeah, Tyrell Lomax, I think, can be pretty good in a couple of years. He keeps saying that his work on is his mobility around the field. Kyle Tuinukuafe, I love that story, how he's come from club rugby and
So good.
And made a name for himself.
The mustache, like we just call him Uncle Carl when he plays here at my house. It's like, there he is.
Yeah.
Just a great and a great story, yeah. And then like a props prop, right? Like, I mean, don't want to see him with ball in hand when you're standing on the gain line, but like also just a scrummager, like through and through. Yeah,
and there's a young hooker coming through too. Bloody strong kid, Dylan Irvine, but he's a first 15 kid, so of course I know who he is. But I as long as I think, like if you're a front rower and you like the Franks brothers and you like coffee. And you like lifting in the gym, I think you're pretty good. If you don't like either of those three things, you go down in my list. So, that's sort of how I rank a front rower.
Yeah. Well, that's a high standard, but I guess that's maybe why we've had like an hour and a half chat now. So
yeah,
we're all good. Right on, brother. Hey, man, I really appreciate you. Thank you so much for taking the time. Like I know we're all, stuck at home and doing our thing, but, still got to, take time, make time to take time. So I really, truly appreciate that on your, I guess, it's Thursday night here, but it's Friday where you're at. But, so I'll probably let you go now. I'm going to try and send you some Type 5-7 stuff. I don't know. Like, I'm sure the first Type 5-7 tournament I played in was in Hamilton, actually.
Oh, cool. Yeah, because I was wondering, because I've been following your page for a while now. And I always wondered whether I didn't. Then I was surprised to find out it was American page. I was like, oh, Type 5-7s, man. How does that come about? But yeah, it seems to be a thing in New Zealand, doesn't it? Where because sevens is such a fast guys game, they had to create a Type 5-7s where the rule is you have to have played for a lock or a prop or a hooker to play in the sevens tournament. I used to love the Type 5-7s concept. It's when I saw your page on Instagram, I followed it straight away, and was surprised to find out all the links. First of all, it was you, and I've dealt with you through the Iron Neck. I was like, oh shit, like how is this all coming together? Then we start the chat with you knowing the Sinkinsons from Whakatane and the Thornellies from here. And then, I've loved this chat. It's been awesome. Thanks so much for having me on. It's been great. It's been awesome. And if you want to do a round two, flick me a message with any questions you have. And as you know, I'm pretty honest. I feel like I'm already going to get in trouble if anyone sees this one because I've sort of said different things that, I'm too honest for my own good sometimes and how I think. I already feel bad that I've said Offa is a bit below Tyrell and Nepal. I already feel bad about that, you know. So but any question you have, just send them through, and I'll answer the best I can,
Oh, nice.
and then regret it for the rest of the night.
Yeah, I think you'll be all right. The good thing about it is that no one gives a shit about rugby in America, so not too many people will see this. It's going to be all right, I think. Yeah, and like I just, as a front row guy, like I would play sevens during the summertime because there was nothing else to do. There's nowhere else, to do.
Yeah.
There's like ball handling and conditioning and things like that. Like you just have this appreciation for like running with ball in space, and so like I did it for a long time. But like you get to the end of the season and get cut. At the end, like there'll only be 11 guys all summer. Championship tournaments coming up at the end of the year, and it's like, hey man, we're gonna pick this other kid from across the street. Hasn't trained with us, he doesn't know anyone here, but he's an actual like back.
Yeah.
And then at one point in my career, like at in San Francisco, where I was like, I didn't know if I wanted to play anymore. Like I had a really bad experience, sort of on the trot, like 4 years in a row, and lots of like selection issues and things like that, and sort of like self-doubt, and I'm not a very good player if I'm not a very confident player. So I was like, well, if I can't have fun doing this, right? Like if I can't throw my own tournament with my own rules and play against people that I want, that I've invited here, like then I probably shouldn't be playing anymore. And I think the very first tournament that I threw Type 5 sevens was like 7 teams. It was like us and our wives. We didn't even have kids yet, so like there was no one there.
Yeah.
And I had gone all out, and did a bunch of stuff, and like asked sponsors for money and stuff. And now it's like 10 years later, and I've ran like 13. I ran tournaments in 2 different cities here in California the last 2 years. Sponsors and hundreds of people and things like that, and everyone says the same thing, like, this is a great idea, this is so fun. I've got guys have been retired for 10 years, came out and like dusted off the boots for the first time in years, and limping away from the field, like cuts and bruises, and like going to the hospital, like thank you for doing this. I'm like, what's the fucking hospital, Dan? Like you got a job and like kids and like you on Monday, like I appreciate it so much, like thank you.
Yeah.
And that like that was enough. That was just sort of like to reaffirm and like to get sort of stuck back into it, and like realize why you play the game and what's most important about it. It wasn't about this silly like thing. So it is cool, like it is a cool thing, so I'm gonna try and send you some kit so you can rock it around Nelson.
Awesome.
And the people there will appreciate it right away. Where like I'll walk around with it and they're like, what's that? What is that thing? And what is rugby and stuff? And then you've got to have, like, I think American rugby players, like earlier, the first 5 to 10 years you play rugby, then there's like this drunken rant that you go on about rugby and like where it came from and all these things. And then like the last 10 years, you're just like, yeah, it's sort of like that, sort of like this. And you try to boil it down to like your elevator pitch. You got 30 seconds like before you just totally nose out and start speaking in a different language. So
that's a word I've only heard on that podcast.
Rugby nose. I'm adopting it. I might give it up though. Haskell in the Scrum comments, I just can't.
Yeah.
Scum. So. Well, cheers, man. Thanks very much. I appreciate it, Kane.
Awesome. Cheers, bro. Thank you.
Bet.
So bad.
Stop.